always starts a meeting or a program with a proverb. And the African starts with an apology. So let me take this opportunity to render an apology to you people, because we should have started some 50 minutes back, somewhere 9:40 or 45 thereabout. It's now almost 10 o'clock. Pardon us, we had some technical challenges, and pray that it will not happen again. I am in the person of Idrisu Adam Shaibu, and the next 1.5 hours or so, I will take you through the Unit 1 of African Studies. African Studies. So I start the ball rolling with the Unit 1 that has to do with the caption or the topic, African Studies as an academic discipline. African Studies as an academic discipline. And in this unit, it is made up of 6 sections. And the outline of these sections are: the section 1 deals with the nature and scope of African Studies. Section 2 talks about factors for the late development of African Studies. Section 3 has to do with the evolution and growth of African Studies. The next section, which is section 4, deals with the objectives and impact of African Studies, or the discipline African Studies. The 5th section talks about the challenges or the setbacks that African Studies is facing. Put in a different way, as it's captured in your model, it says challenges facing the discipline. And the last but not least, which is the section 6, talks about the state of the discipline. The state of the discipline. Let me use this opportunity to welcome you to this very interesting and important subject called African Studies. And I'm sure by the end of the day, you will grow to love the discipline. Grow to love the discipline. And let's ask ourselves, at the end of the day, what is the expectation? The expectation is that at the end of the unit, the students will be able to explain what African Studies is. The students will be able to state the objective of African Studies. And of course, be able to explain the factors responsible for the late development of African Studies. In addition to that, the students will be able to describe the development and growth of the discipline known as African Studies. We cannot end the unit without looking at the challenges that African Studies is facing. and at the end of the day, make an evaluation evaluation on the state of the discipline. So these are the expectations. Yes, these are the expectations. Right, having said that, we can move to the next section where we need to talk about, or we start our discussion. And that has to do with the nature and scope of the discipline. The nature and scope of the discipline. And remember, this has to do with section 1. This has to do with section 1. Let me start by asking, when you were given this course, what came to mind? African studies. I'm sure some of you might have thought that, well, am I going to study about the way Africans sing, the way Africans drum and dance? Or I'm going to study about the culture of the Akanas or the Eres, because this is African studies. In other words, the question is, what is African studies? What is African studies? Yes, like I indicated, to some people, when we talk about African studies, it is about singing, drumming, and dancing in the African way. Some may even say that it's about the African way of life, or everything African. All these answers are correct, in the sense that they all form part of what is known as African studies. Yes, they all form part of what is known as African studies. In this case, African studies is more than just singing, drumming, and dancing. It goes beyond that. That is why I said African studies, all the definitions or the arrays form part of African studies. In that case, the discipline goes beyond singing, drumming, and dancing. If it goes beyond these things that I've mentioned, then we still have to contend with the question of what is African studies. But you see, before we were able to do justice in court and to be able to define the discipline known as African studies, we need to briefly look at when it emerged. We need to also look at its scope. Then based on that, we can coin a definition. I say this because if you don't know what it entails, you don't know what African studies entails, then finding an appropriate definition for it will become a challenge or difficulty. So you need to understand its scope. Then based on that, you'll be able to come out with a working definition that will cover, in quote, if not the entirety of what is known as African studies, but a greater percentage of what constitute African studies. The discipline known as African Studies emerged somewhere in the second half of the 20th century. Somewhere in the second half of the 20th century. And indeed, when it emerged, we were all happy. People were happy that finally we have something that has to do with the African, that's African Studies. But one thing that was a bone of contention among scholars, and that led to a disagreement among the scholars, has to do with the exact definition of the course. And this has a relation to the scope of it. What should be its nature? What should be its scope? And that is where the disagreement cropped up. Scholars were divided concerning what should constitute the nature and the scope of African Studies. Indeed, opinions varied. And at the end of the day, we had two perspectives that came out. Namely, Eurocentric and Afrocentric. Eurocentric and Afrocentric. These were the perspectives that came up. Eurocentric, Afrocentric. Now this means that scholars were divided on two lines. There were those who took the Eurocentric line and those who took the Afrocentric line. Now the Eurocentric is saying that, or those proponents, the scholars who think that it should be Eurocentric, they limited the scope of the discipline to sub-Saharan Africa. On the other hand, they were thinking that the Arabs and the Islamic regions of Africa should be included in the study of African Studies. This implies that the first perspective, Eurocentric, thought that the Arabs and the Islamic regions of Africa should not constitute what is known as African Studies. The other camp thinks otherwise, and this became a bone of contention. Whilst they were trying to settle this issue, then a new dimension also emerged, adding to the discipline. And this new dimension sought to expand the scope and shape the definition of the discipline. What is this new dimension? The new dimension centers on the increasing awareness of the importance of the African diaspora, the importance of the awareness of the African diaspora. So the question we ask is, what do we mean by African diaspora? What do you mean by the African diaspora? Now, African diaspora could be seen from a different perspective. I'll give you two so that you will search for the rest. When we talk about the African diaspora, one, we are referring to Africans who were forcefully migrated from the shores of Africa to the outside world, particularly the Caribbeans, where they were forced or put into forced labor. They had to work on plantations in Europe, part of Europe and America. I know by this time you know the group of people I'm referring to. I'm referring to the slaves, the Africans who were forcefully taken by the slave masters, taken away. So we see their descendants as African diaspora. Refer to Africans who have voluntarily left the shores of Africa for greener pastures. Left the shores of Africa for greener pastures. And in the Ghanaian parlance, we refer to them as boggers. Boggers. Yes. Some of them have left Ghana for more than 20 years, 25 years and whatsoever. Some have even died and have been buried there. So we refer to them as the African diaspora. So these are the two perspectives when we talk about the African diaspora. Like I said, you can find out the AU's concept or understanding or definition of the African diaspora. Now, having looked at these perspectives, that is the Eurocentric, the Afrocentric, and then the African diaspora, but African diaspora, then let's come to see if we can define African states. If we can define African states. If we can define African states. Now we can look at the definition from the two perspectives, the narrower one and the broader definition. The narrow one, or the simple one, we can say that African studies is studies or a study of everything African. Is the study of everything African. That is everything that concerns the African. Everything that embodies the life of the African. And here we can talk about religion. We can talk about culture. We can talk about history of the African. We can even talk about politics, which today has become part of us. The sciences, everything that has embodied our social life, everything that concerns the African. That's why I said that it is everything African. Let's look at the other side of the coin. That's the broader perspective. The broader perspective is saying that African studies is an interdisciplinary field. an interdisciplinary field that focuses on the study of Africa, its diaspora, its culture, history, and adapts African-centered approach to solving African problems. I want you to take note of certain keywords in the definition. Take note of the word interdisciplinary field. Take note of the word study of Africa. Take note of the word its diaspora. That's diaspora. Diaspora. Culture. History. And take note of this, the phrase, adapts African-centered approach to solving what? African problems. These words or phrases that I've asked you to take note of, let me take them one after the other to briefly explain them. When we say that African studies is interdisciplinary, it means that African studies is not just about one course. Rather, it is a combination of courses that have been brought together. Combination of several courses that have been brought together to form what is known as African studies. And these courses are interdependent in the sense that they help us to not only to study about Africa and its people, but it enables us to understand Africa and its people. And this is very, very important. So we have courses like history, religion, democracy, and culture. And African studies is to enhance our understanding of ourselves and how we can help develop our continent. In addition to that, how we can design and find out the ways that we can resolve our challenges from the African perspective or with the African lenses. Now, I said that African studies also is a combination of several courses. Let me ask you, do you think that the pure sciences is or should be part of African studies? Of course, I'm asking this based on the fact that it's common knowledge that the pure sciences have helped in the advancements of knowledge about the African. So that's why I asked that question. Presently, there are attempts to incorporate the pure sciences into African studies. This is because before the introduction of Western science, Africans have their own, and we continue to have our own pure sciences. Yes, we continue to have our own pure sciences. Take for instance, the herbal medicines some of us take. If you are to know the chemical composition of these herbal medicines, you'll be surprised. And that is why most of them, let me say most of them, of course there are some that are coming from quack ones, we cannot rule out that. But those that are scientifically tested and they have gone through scientific means in their preparation, I tell you, if you check the chemical compositions, you'll be surprised. And that is why there are certain sicknesses or illnesses. Some doctors will recommend that, look, go and get this herbal medicine and take, because they know the efficacy of our herbal medicines. And these also form part of the pure sciences. Let me give you one last illustration on that. In the olden days, and even today some of us do it, when you get a cut, maybe through blade or knife, you know, one thing that we often get afraid is, think of tetanus. So we quickly maybe go and get injection. But our forefathers, especially those days when Western medicine was not there, they just when they get a cut, they just get a place where they will just go and wee and pour the wee on the cut. And that ends it. No issue of tetanus. No issue of tetanus. And they are good to go. All these are part of pure sciences. The preservation of meat in the African way, where you add salt, either meat or fish, where you add salt to it, it's pure science. It is of recent origin that we have fridges and freezers or whatsoever where you put your meat and whatsoever there to preserve it or preserve them. But prior to the coming of the Europeans, our ancestors preserved their food, their meat, even fufu. They will put salt around it and it will be preserved. Meat, the same to once they put salt, it will not spoil. And all these things that I've mentioned form part of pure sciences. And that is why scholars in the field are thinking of incorporating pure sciences to African studies. Let me give you one important illustration. Before the coming of the Europeans and before the mortuaries before mortuaries were introduced here, our ancestors had the way of preserving dead bodies. They could preserve dead bodies for years without decaying. I learned of a chief that was preserved for over 8 years because there was a litigation after his death. How did our people preserve that chief? There are certain herbs when you go to the unless you know them. If you don't know them, you will not get. If you know that this, you wouldn't know that this is the herb that you will use. There are certain herbs that our forefathers would go to the forest, take these herbs, come and grind it, liquid, into the throat of the person, the dead person, and leave the dead person like that. They will make sure that the nose and other parts are covered. The nose, the ears, and any outlet covered. Whatever is the herbs that they have squeezed and given to that person will lie down there for years. It will never smell. But what will happen is that the water in the person will drain and the skin will become so dry. And that is what the Egyptians also used to preserve their pharaohs and then their queen mothers. And this way of preserving corpse forms part of pure sciences. There are a lot of illustrations, but we have to move forward. Yes, we have to move forward. We have to move forward. Yes, we have spoken about the African diaspora, and I have given you what African diaspora means. So I wouldn't talk about the African diaspora. But one thing also that African studies is more interested is in the phenomenon of the returnees. Yes, Africans the black Americans, or Africans who had their roots from the African continent, and who are desiring or who have the wish to come back home, not necessarily to stay permanently, but to be alternating from Europe or America and Africa and whatsoever, like Isaac Hayes and Rita Marley did. Rita Marley, she's in Ghana, somewhere at Ebri. So sometimes she comes to stay in Ghana, and sometimes, after some time, she goes back. And this is an interesting thing about African cities. Then another issue that we need to note is this: that African studies uses scientific approach in these studies. When it comes to methodology, in this finding, we use scientific approach, and which is very, very important. Aside the scientific approach, one thing also that is very, very relevant has to do, especially when you look at the definition, we have the issue of history there, and which is very, very important. History has contributed, in fact, it has a pioneering role in restoring the African past. And when we go deeper in our discussion, you'll get to know the role of history, how history has been able to restore, even if not fully. History is still in the restoration process, especially to restore the African glory, the African lost glory during the time of the slavery. We'll discuss about that later. Finally, let me look at, in the definition, what that talks about African-centered approach. And this came from one scholar, Melefi K. Asante, somewhere in the 1980s. He advocates that if African wants to make a headway, then we should look for African-centered ways of solving our problems. And I agree with him. Let me give you a scene. If you have two people, one is sitting closer by a fire, a traditional African fire where we use firewood. You light firewood and somebody is sitting by it. And then the next person is far away, distance from the fire. Who is feeling the heat? Of course, your suggestion is right. Your thought is right. It is the one who is closer by the fire, not the one who is far away from the fire. Because the one who is far away from the fire cannot prescribe any relevant solution to quenching the fire. Looking at the distance, he may not even know the intensity of the fire. He may not even know how severe that the one who is sitting, the severe burn or burns that the one who is sitting by the fire is having. So if you ask the one who is far away to prescribe solution for the one who is sitting by the fire, we are making a wrong judgment or wrong request. If anything at all, The one who's sitting by the fire should be asked and find out. He who may be able to tell us that, oh, when you pull this fire or this wood, the fire intensity will reduce. Or when you do this or that, the fire will go off. But if you go and take somebody who is not closer by the fire and is far off, and you are asking the person, oh, there's a fire burning Kujo, how do we off the fire? The man has not seen the fire. He has not experienced the fire. He doesn't know the intensity of the fire and all this. How can he give you a realistic solution to your problem? He will not be able to do it. And this is what African leaders, this is our problem. When we have economic challenges, not that we don't have the technocrats in Africa, not that we don't have the technocrats who are Africans. We have the technocrats here. But interestingly, we quickly run to America. We quickly run to Europe for suggestions. And they will give us a tailored-made solutions. And those tailored-made solutions are solutions that suit their environment. It doesn't suit our environment. It doesn't work for us. Then we'll take those suggestions from them, hook, line, and sinker, and come and implement it. And at the end of the day, our people are suffering. What are we doing? So Melefi Asante is saying that, look, we need to looking at it from the African perspective. This is not to say that we cannot cooperate or we cannot ask the European for suggestions on how to solve our economic problems. No. But when they give us the suggestions, can we sit down and take a second look at those suggestions and ask ourselves whether it will benefit our people or not? But interestingly, we just come and then implement it. And then at the end of the day, our people are suffering. As much as I can remember, since the beginning of this Fourth Republic or so, since 1990 or so, up to date, Ghana has gone to the IMF for about 18 or 19 times for loans and whatsoever. But at the end of the day, what do we see? We seem to be at the same square. We are not progressing simply because of what they tell us to do. And it is not favoring our environment. So let's be like the Chinese. The Chinese went to America, studied the way the Americans produced their cars. But when they went back to China, they look at their environment and said to themselves that, if we should produce American type of cars, it will not be suitable to our environment. It will bring a lot of challenges to our people. So let us look at how they make their cars, but let us design ours to be different from theirs. The consumption, let ours be low, because most of our American cars are high petrol consumption. They consume a lot. So the Chinese decided to do theirs such a way that it will not consume much fuel. And this is what African leaders should do. This is what we should do. But we just go, take the ideas from there, we will not scrutinize it, we will not take a second look at it, whether it will favor us or not. How come you go and take a loan as an African leader? Then the IMF will tell you that for the next 5 years or 10 years, one, increase your utility every year, increase your utility bill. 2, no employment in the public sector. Don't employ graduates from the university. So those who graduate from the university, who should absorb them? But interestingly, our government will do it. They will not think about repercussions. People are graduating, no job. And these are some of the problems. So that is why some of us agree with Melefi that it is about time we go to the drawing board and look for African-centered ways of solving our problems. solving our problems, so that it will help us. For us, where we are going, it wouldn't help us. It will not help us. Let's look at the next section that has to do with factors that contributed to the late development of African cities. Factors that contributed to the late development of African cities. Just a minute. It has to do with the factors for the late development of African cities. Unfortunately, it seems I don't have it on the, forgive me, it's a technical problem. I don't have it on my slide. Factors that contributed to the late development of African cities. Well, before the 1950s, the discipline known as African cities was not being taught in our tertiary institutions. It wasn't there. It was after the 1950s that African cities was introduced. That African cities was what? Introduced. Now, if it wasn't taught before the 1950s, what factors led to that? So I'll briefly mention the factors. We have we have a factor like philosophical arguments. We have a factor like historical argument. And the third factor has to do with the work of the missionaries. The work of the missionaries. And the last one has to do with the role of Africans themselves. The role of Africans themselves. The role of Africans themselves. Let me take this one after the other. Philosophical arguments. What were some of the philosophical arguments that were raised? Raised by who? And why were those arguments raised? You know, several philosophical arguments were raised or advanced to indicate that Africa did not form part of world civilization. The one the people are talking about, or people were talking about world civilization, Africans were not part, because we have not contributed anything to world civilization. And the fact of the matter is that to the Europeans, Africans were uncivilized people. How can uncivilized people contribute to civilization? They cannot contribute to civilization. Yes, they cannot contribute to civilization. And these were the mentalities of some Europeans. Let's take one a British historian, Arnold Toynbee. He said something. Arnold thinks that Africans have not contributed to any civilization at all. And like I said, we were uncivilized, backward people, barbarians, and what have you. So the issue of civilization were out of their point. We were not civilized. Yes. These were some of the comments they made. An European says that blacks, that's the black race, we happens to be an inferior race. An inferior race. And listen to what James McQueen, who happens to be a British, this is what he said. That if Britain really wanted to do good in Africa, Britain must teach Africans that white men were their superiors. The white men were their superiors. Their superiors. In fact, some of them thought that the colonialism that we went through was a form of their civilizing us. And to them, they saw it as their burden to civilize us. And the only means they could civilize us was to enslave us. The only means they could civilize us was to enslave us. Was to enslave us. And some of their mentality, they had their mentality from Darwin's revolutionary principle that talks about the survival of the fetus and also the origin of species. And this scholarship made the Europeans to see as inferior people. People were inferior. Why were all these misrepresentations made by the Europeans? They were made because they wanted to justify the enslavement, the continual enslavement of the African. They wanted to justify what they were doing so that they can have the way out to continue to enslave us. And that was why they made all those false allegations or arguments, philosophical arguments, so that they will continue to what? Enslave us. And in enslaving us, they are telling the world that they were civilizing us. So we need to shut our mouth quiet, need to keep quiet for them to continue to enslave us. And in doing that, they were civilizing us. But you see, the truth of the matter is that the word civilization itself, civilization started now in Africa, in Egypt. Egypt, some thousands of years back, was a civilized nation. And Egypt under the pharaohs was once a superpower in the world. They ruled the world. And history tells us that some of the Greek scholars were in Africa, specifically in Egypt, in Alexander in Egypt, where they acquired knowledge. When you search your history, you find out that Socrates, Archimedes, Pythagoras, and the other Greeks, some of the Greek philosophers, they learned or they acquired knowledge in Alexander. They came to Africa, and specifically in Egypt, and Egypt in Alexander, to acquire knowledge. And after acquiring knowledge, they went back to teach their people. The first irrigation in the world happens to be in Egypt. The Shadef irrigation. That is the first irrigation that was connected to the Nile. So if Africans were not civilized, how could the Africans create that irrigation project? That happens to also to be the first in the world. Have you asked yourself about the pyramid that is found and presently also in Egypt? How was the pyramid built? Look at the architectural design. Look at the materials they use. If Africans were not developed, then how come that Egypt was able to advance and to become a superpower? In brief, the Europeans who advocated that we are uncivilized and we have not contributed to world civilization had their own agenda in doing that. Had their own agenda in doing that, because in reality, civilization started from Africa. Let's move to the second factor that has to do with historical argument. Historical argument or reason. So sometimes you may see philosophical argument or philosophical reason, historical argument or historical reasons. What were some of the reasons they gave under history? Yes, just like the philosophical one. To the Europeans and Americans, when we are talking about the history of Africa, when we are talking about the history of the world, Africans have not contributed anything to the history of the world. And this is simply because Africans do not have history. So if we don't have history, then how can we contribute to the history of the world? How can we contribute to the history of the world? The Europeans made this point because when they came to this part of our world, they did not find any literate society. They didn't find any literate society. The literate society here I'm talking about is literate in their sense, not in the African sense. Yes, because talking about education, we have the Western education, which presently we are doing. Apart from the Western education, we have also African form of education, which of course, unfortunately, some of us refer to as informal, which some of us are not happy. Why should the European one be formal and ours informal? So we have our own system of education before the Europeans came. But unfortunately, when they came here, they didn't see schools. And because of that, they concluded that we do not have history. Apart from not finding literate society, when they came, they realized that because we do not have a literate society, we don't have any written information concerning our history. And by then, the definition of history, the subject history, based from their perspective, was centered on a written form. So if you are talking about that you have a history, then you need to document the history. If you don't document it, then it's not history. But when they came to this part of our world, we had what is known as oral history. Our people could tell where they migrated from, who the ancestors were and whatsoever. It is part of history. But because they had their own standard, which they used to measure hours, they concluded that we do not have history. And for that matter, when we are talking about the history of the world, we have not contributed to the history of the world. And this issue also, in a way, contributed to the late emergence of African cities. Similar to the argument they advanced, the philosophical argument they advanced, that also in a way contributed to the delay of the discipline known as the delay in the emergence of African cities. So it played role, key roles. Now, let's look at the third factor, the work of missionaries. The work of missionaries. Yes, the work of missionaries. The European missionaries that came to propagate Christianity. Let me ask you this. I'm sure I'm online, but I know that some of you may be known as Emmanuel, Sarah, Elizabeth, John, Thomas, Saul, or Paul, and what have you. In other words, so-called Christian names. This happens with the work of the Europeans. Let me say this. Those names that are mentioned, or the names that we picture, in quote, as Christian names, in reality, they are not Christian names. They are European names. Why am I saying this? Names, or naming somebody, a person, the name comes from the culture of the people. Names are derived from culture. Names are derived from culture. So Peter, John, Elizabeth, Sarah, and the rest, they are European names. I want you to, after the class, I want you to, the name of Jesus. Jesus is English or anglicized. It's European. But the Jewish name, Jesus was a Jew, is given name by his earthly parents, or the name the angel gave to Mary to be given to Jesus is Yeshua. Yeshua. Which of course I know some of you are aware of it. It's Yeshua. But when the Old Testament was being translated first into Greek, which is known as the Septuagint, they needed to translate the names from Hebrew names into European names. And that is how we come by saying that all the names in the English Bible that today we use are all European names. They are not Christian names. They are not Christian names. They are all European names. So you see, the point of the argument I'm making and heading towards is this. When the missionaries came to this part of our world, they condemned or denounced everything African. Everything that has to do with the African was denounced, seen as demonic. As demonic. Our music, our dance, our sculpture, everything about us was considered as demonic. Of course, let me say that there were certain practices that were inhuman. We admit that. But you see, in all this, you need to find out the reason why those practices that were inhuman, those practices were done. You need to find out before you condemn our people. But this is what the Europeans did. If you want to go to heaven, you are not only to accept Christ, but you have to change your name. So Kwame, Akanten, then they will give you Peter or James. You pick an European name, which they say, or they told our forefathers that it is a Christian name, but they are not Christian names, they are European names. And coupled with that, the missionaries opened, and per what the doctrines they taught our people, it made some of our people to shy away from everything African. And interestingly, even in this 21st century, some of us, we don't want to hear anything about Africa at all. We don't want to, everything about Africa to some of us is bad, is negative. Everything about America, everything about Europe is good. So for that matter, you see today, most of the youth want to go and run, and they want to go to America. And they go to America, they are sweeping and bathing dead bodies and whatsoever, because they are going for greener pastures. Yes, it's good to do that. It's good. But can we appreciate what we have as Africans? Can we appreciate? We have been indoctrinated by the missionaries, that to the extent that our African music, we have thrown it away. Our religion, we have thrown it away. And we have now identified ourselves with the Europeans and the Americans. African languages, some of us can't speak our mother dialect. All that we know is Brofo, English. We rattle English from morning to evening, to then even to night, in the night. When we wake up to is English. Our dialect of our parents, we can't speak, we don't understand them. And some of us don't even want to go back home, to visit our grandmothers and whatsoever. No, oh my God. All this happens to be the indoctrination of what? The Western missionaries. Even years after they have left, that mentality is still there. Thrown everything African away. And what they indoctrinated in us have made us not to believe in ourselves anymore. Yes. We don't believe in ourselves anymore. And that's why most of us, everything Africa is bad. Everything America, everything Europe is good. How then, you see the mistakes our people committed is the same mistake that we are all going through. I'll talk about this in the next issue. So you see, the missionaries, the role they came to play, also in a way contributed to the late development of African cities. Because some of them who came and left after maybe 4 years or 5 years mission work in Africa, when they went back to their homeland, they painted us black. Everything about us was black. How then do you expect the outside world to come and study about us, or even come and have any relationship with us, or do business with us? They wouldn't. They wouldn't. So the report the missionaries gave and what they wrote about the Africa, and what they did by brainwashing us and whatsoever contributed to the late emergence or development of the discipline known as African studies. The last but not least is the role of the African themselves. And this is very, very important and very dear to me. Yes. You see, slavery, we attribute it to the work of the Europeans, the Americans, and what have you, yes. But it wasn't the Americans or the Europeans that went to the hinterlands, that went to Salaga, slave market, to buy the slave. No. It was Africans themselves. Those who were very strong, macho those days. They were the people who contributed it. They would go to Salaga, for instance, and go and buy the slaves. And with their whips, they would chain their own brothers and sisters and carry them, walk with them all the way from Salaga market, the slave market, all the way to the castles at the coast. And interestingly, the price they offered was an eyesore. History tells us that at a point in time, salt was more worthy, more even expensive than a slave. And that tells you that the African slave was good for nothing. Yes, if salt was expensive than the African man, then it tells you they were good for nothing. So the mastermind behind the slavery was not the European. Wasn't the American who came and stayed in the castles and bought the slaves. It was we ourselves, we Africans. We went to the hinterlands. We went to the villages and captured our weaker ones and forwarded them to the castles. And You know, some of the slave masters or slave raiders took schnapps, whiskey, mirror, and then exchanged it in exchange of slave, gave our brothers and sisters out to the Europeans. You see, our forefathers made a great mistake. And today, instead of us in this 21st century, for us as Africans to sit up, we are also doing the same thing. We are also committing the same mistakes. We are committing mistakes. Look at what our politicians are doing. Entering to agreement without a critical look at the agreement or whatsoever they entered with the Europeans. How come we have our own culture? You are now coming to impose European culture on us. Lesbianism, gays, and whatsoever on us. We should teach comprehensive sexual whatsoever in school. So a student who is in class 1, you bring an adult. I saw a film somewhere in Europe where in a class, grown-ups, age of 50 plus, were brought in the class, and they stood naked before the student, and the teacher was teaching them to, using the elders as illustration, naked people as illustration, teaching them about sexual issues. This is not African. This is absolutely not African. We have our own way we do things. But we keep repeating, a cycle. This is some of us our problem. The mistake our forefathers have made, we are also making similar mistakes. Then how can we break loose from the apron of the European, from the apron of the American? Then how can we develop? Until we break loose from Europe and America, we will not develop. We'll see ourselves where we are. So what we are doing is that we go for the IMF loan, World Bank loan. So you think that we are taking 2 steps ahead in economic advancement. You take 2 steps ahead, but you end up taking 3 steps backwards. You have not done anything. This is what will happen. This is what happened. So Africans themselves contributed to the late emergence of African cities. It is even said that even chiefs, our local chiefs, they use what is called the Ahimfe police. If, for instance, I'm a chief, and before becoming a chief, there's a gentleman who opposed me being made the chief, when finally I get the nod, I'll make sure that Ahimfe police will arrest that gentleman and his family and be forwarded, sent to the castle and be given free to the European. The Europeans will take that man and his family away into slavery. These were realities, things that happened. So the Ahimfe police also contributed. So what we are saying is that African studies, Africans also contributed to the late emergence of African cities. Just as today some of us are contributing in retarding the progress of Africa. So it is. Look at the galamsey and whatsoever we are doing. But we are not thinking about it. Just because we'll get money, whether the masses will die, whether the masses will get leukemia, liver diseases and whatsoever will die, we don't care. Ours is to get the money. And people will call us the richest man in Ghana. People are dying. We are getting money and we are happy about that. Right, so in brief, these are some of the factors that contributed to the late development of what? African cities. Let's move to the section 3 that has to do with the evolution and growth of African cities. The evolution and growth of African cities. Yes, the evolution and growth of African cities. One thing, like I said, before the 1950s, there was nothing like African studies done in the tertiary institutions. But after the 1950s, gradually, African studies evolved. What were some of the reasons? We have a reason like student movement in the 1960s in the USA, the emergence of nation states in Africa, the establishment of African universities, the acceptance of oral tradition, and the establishment of African Studies Association. Let me just briefly explain this. We take the first point, student movement in the 1960s in the USA. Yes, student movement. From the 1960s, things began to what? Change in favor of African studies. How does this happen? It did not happen in Africa, the African continent. It happened in the USA. In the USA by then, the black Americans were made to study issues about America. Were made to study issues about America. Issues about Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte and whatsoever. Then, and of course, the 1950s and 60s and whatsoever were eras of racial discrimination or segregation in America. So the blacks, especially the black leadership of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, they sat down and said, we have been discriminated upon by the Americans and other colored people in the states there, that we are Africans. But yet, if we are Africans, we are made to study things about America, made to study things about Europe. Then we need to know things about Africa, where we are coming from. What happened that we got there, or our ancestors got to America and whatsoever. So this civil rights movement, some of the leaders of the civil rights movement started to put pressure on the American government that they need to learn something about their origin, where they were coming from, where their ancestors were picked from, why they were picked from that, why they were picked, and what did they, why they were brought to that place, and what did they do and whatsoever. In other words, they were advocating that they want to know something about Black American studies. And the pressure got to a state that the American state government or president could not contain it anymore. They needed to yield in a way to the demands of the civil rights movement. So they introduced what by then was known as the Black American studies. The Black American studies, or African American studies. And this has to do with programs in the higher institutions by then. So when this happened, then those of us in Africa also chanced on it. And then drill, based on what they have done, we're able to function something. And we also started what is known as African studies. Now, some of these notable leaders of civil rights movement happens to be Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, William Edwards, Bugatti, and the rest. So, in reality, African studies started in the USA, and later we also replicated similar or same here. And today, as we speak, almost every tertiary institution in the world offers African studies. And it may interest you to know this, that Britain, who colonized a lot of nations by then, during the colonial era, as of the 1930s, they had introduced what is similar to African cities. And they had what is known as the School of Oriental and African Cities. And the main purpose is that any of their citizens who is to come to Africa for diplomatic reasons need to learn these Oriental and African cities before the person will be allowed to come to Africa. So they had theirs even as early as the 1930s. So this was a factor, one of the factors that contributed to the evolution or emergence and growth of African cities. The second one has to do with the emergence of nation states in Africa. Yes, emergence of nation states in Africa. You know, by the mid-1960s, most African countries had gained independence, and one of them is Ghana. And in the issue of drawing considerable international attention, Ghana had attention, especially when Ghana became a member of the UN. And if a nation gains independence, after independence, the next meeting for the UN, that nation, the officials are invited to come and tell the UN what the nation has. So Nkrumah was able to market Ghana very well. He marketed Ghana at the first UN meeting that he attended, representing the nation. And indeed, that drew the interest of the outside world, not only to Ghana, but into Africa in general. And this was the era of what is known as the Cold War. How can a war be cold? Be described as cold? Well, in the course of our discussion, I will explain what it means by the Cold War. Simply put, the Cold War simply is talking about a competition between USA and Russia. And what is this competition? They are competing about influence. Who should have influence, or who should take control of the economic resources of third world countries? Yes, which of them should have control over the economic resources of third world countries, which Ghana is part? And today, what is happening in Russia and Ukraine? We can see it as Cold War. Cold War because Russia is involved, but America is indirectly involved. We'll talk about this Cold War more later. So when Nkrumah and other African leaders were able to market the African continent or their respective countries, what happened? The Western world started to have interest, and it was the period of the Cold War. And America went further to that by trying to sponsor African programs so that they can have access to Africa. And the real intention is about our resources. That is all. Real intention is about our resources. So the emergence of nation states in Africa, in a way, contributed to the evolution and growth of African cities. The other issue is the establishment of African universities. Yes, African universities. The Europeans, Britain for instance, when they were ruling us, they started Legon. They put up Legon. And all the lecturers were all expatriates. All the lecturers were all expatriates. So when we gained independence, Nkrumah added some. He built Cape Coast University and then Tech. And then, with time, our African leaders taxed our educated scholars to draw a curriculum that will suit our environment and to be studied at not only at the lower level but at the university level. In addition to that, we told the expatriate lecturers that they have done well. The African is capable of managing its own affairs. So we started replacing them one after the other, replacing the lecturers one after the other with our own people. We can't educate our own people and then they are jobless, and you, an European, will come and then you have jobs. No. So we started replacing them one after the other. Everything was changed to reflect things African. So in a way, the establishment of African universities also played a key role in the evolution and growth of African cities. The other aspect which I would like to briefly touch is the acceptance of oral tradition. Yes, I indicated earlier on that in the early days, history or the scope of history was confined to only written document. But with time and with the effort of some African scholars as well as some European scholars who came, the European ones came to part of Africa, certain part of Africa, and together with African historians, they studied about our history and came out, made an argument that yes, the African has history. Their colleagues, Europeans, who initially thought that Africa did not have history, were wrong. We had history, but our history is orally transmitted. So they were able to make an argument to the extent that the world accepted that there's a need to widen the scope of history to include oral tradition. To include oral tradition. And with that, it's helped in the evolution of what? African studies. Yes. The last has to do with the establishment of African studies associations in the also not in Ghana, not in Africa, that took place in New York. And because of time, I'll allow you to read that yourself, so that we can quickly move to the next session that has to do with the objectives and impact of African studies. Objectives and impact of African studies. What is the objective, or what are the objectives of African studies? Yes, since its emergence, what were the objectives that led to its emergence first? Then after that, we'll look at how it has been able to impact, or what impact has it made. First, some of the objectives. 1, offer students the opportunity to study Africa from all facets. And that this is the opportunity, that's one of the objectives. What you are doing today. African studies is giving you that chance, that opportunity to study everything about yourself, to study everything about your neighbor, and which is very, very important. To study everything about your economy, about your politics, about your brethren who are in the diaspora, and what have you. Previously, that opportunity wasn't there because African studies by then was not in existence. But now that it is in existence, it is giving you that opportunity to study. The second one has to do with the projection of the African personality. Yes. Projection of the African personality. In fact, I said it that during the slave trade, the African lost his glory. The African was good for nothing. To the extent that even salt was more expensive and precious than the African slaves. It tells us that we were good for nothing. we lost our glory. We were sold as a commodity. Not only sold, some cases we were exchanged for good. And I said it earlier on, the slave raiders will go and raid their community and carry our brothers to the shores. When they get to the Europeans at the shores, the castles, they will exchange the African slave with Africa for whiskey, European whiskey, European snap, European mirror, and even fruit, apple and the rest. It tells us that we lost our dignity. But you see, African cities want to restore that image through history. African cities want to restore that lost glory and to tell the world that, yes, our forefathers made that mistake by selling themselves into slavery. But we are as important as the Europeans and Americans are. If they want to develop, they cannot do away with us. And we are not inferior. We are also superior in our own way. And this is what African cities want to do, to project the African personality. But this will be realized if we Africans do not continue to look down upon ourselves. Continue to think that it is the Europeans and the Americans that they always have the solution to our problems. We as Africans cannot think for ourselves. Until we change our mentality, it will not work for us. That projection of the African personality will not be able to, we will not achieve it. The third issue has to do with the projection of the African cultural values and traditions. Yes, projection of the African cultural values and traditions. Yes. You see, we are in a globalized world, and today globalization has brought a lot of changes. And these changes are taking place all over the world, not in Europe, everywhere. Today, look at what we are doing today. Look at maybe the distance where I am and where you are. Issue of globalization and whatsoever. And so, African culture and tradition is being subordinated. That is relegated to the background, to the glorification of Western values. Yes. Today, some of us as Africans, we don't value our tradition. We don't value our culture anymore. Our cultural values, we don't value them anymore. You see an African holding something to give to an elder man, and he's using his left hand. What is the right hand doing? Nothing. You give it. That is not African. Somebody will say it doesn't make difference. No. In our cultural values, it doesn't show respect. It does not show respect. We have lost our values. You sit in the car and you see an elder man, especially when you go to Accra, and then you take the bus, this Odogono or Odoko buses to what's the way, post office. You see young guys sitting down, and the aged standing. We've lost our values. In typical African setting, you, the young man, must get up and give the seat to the old man. Because if he was your father, to be your father, will you have done that? Imagine he's your father. Will you allow your 60 or 70-year-old father to stand and you will sit down when the car is moving? But today, this is what we are seeing. This is what we are seeing. We have lost our cultural values. In terms of tradition, now we prefer, especially with our ladies, to wear Western dresses than African dresses. Western dresses. Some ladies, and even today, men, they'll go to the extent of bleaching because God was wrong to have made them black. So they want to be Europeans. They want to be white, then they will bleach. Why? Why? But you see, African states want Africans to value their culture, appreciate their culture, appreciate their tradition. China is China today because they don't play with their culture. They don't play with their tradition. Even in this 21st century, Chinese, wherever they are, their favorite food is rice. They use their chopstick. They use their chopstick. But today, some of us as Africans, when you go home, when we go to back home to our towns or where we are coming from, and our parents, grandparents give us fufu, and some of us will be asking, do you have spoon? You want to eat fufu with spoon? You want to eat fufu with spoon? When God has given you 5 fingers, you are asking for spoon. Please, the Chinese man, when you invite him to your house, and you know, sometimes they carry their chops along with them. He will never use spoon. But Africans, we have thrown our values, tradition away. Fufu, eating fufu with spoon. God, have mercy. Let me deal with the last one, then we move forward. That has to do with the African solution to African problems, which I earlier on said about it. Melefia said this, that we should have what? An African way of solving our problems. I just had one example and then we move ahead. You see, this Fourth Republic, some of us, what we believe was that even if there was a need for us to go to adapt democracy, as today we are practicing, we shouldn't have gone for Western type of democracy, because the Western and American type of democracy, it is very expensive. And our late president, Rollins, said it. It was very expensive. Yes, very expensive. You see, democracy is not a new thing. And let me tell you that democracy is not from Africa. It's not from the Europeans. It didn't start from Africa. I say Africa. It didn't start from Europe. Our system of chieftaincy is democratic. Our chieftaincy institution is democratic. That is why when you go to Malaysia, we have Nifahini, Benguhini, and other sub-chiefs to help in the administration of the Asanteman. And that is democracy. That is democracy. But you see, we were pressured by the Western world to adapt their system of democracy. And today, what is happening? It is breeding corrupt people, breeding corrupt practices, politicians. We could have at least looked at the good things in their democracy, then conduct a study about the democracy in our chieftaincy institution, and then blend the two to favor us. Just like the Chinese did. Chinese are not practicing 100% Western democracy. They looked at the Western system of democracy and then added their own system of democracy, and it is working perfectly for them. But in Africa, we just went and took hook, line, and sinker. We took everything from the Americans and Europeans. And today, look at the democracy we are facing. This politician will come and chop money and go. And by the time I realize the French will be, look at what's happening in the system. It's like they will come and create the money, loot among them, and loot it and share among themselves. Well, if, for instance, if I'm to go into democracy, into politician, and become a politician, I'll sell my car, sell my house. When my party comes into power, what do you expect me to do? I must find ways and means to what? Recoup that money. Because if I sell my house, I'm going to support the party. And definitely, when the party comes into power, I have to find ways and means to what? Ways and means to what? Buy a house. This is what happened. So Western system of education, democracy is breeding corruption among our people. That is why some of us agree with Melefi Asante that we need to look for an African way of solving our own problems, and we'll be out of this mess that we are finding ourselves in. It is not late. We can conduct a study in our democracy system and then blend with Western democracy and change the system. Let me look at the last one, the impact of the discipline. The impact of the discipline. You see, the discipline has made a lot of impact. Yes, I must confess that made a lot of impact. But the challenge here is that it has not been conducted. Scholars are yet to conduct a research and quantify that impact into percentages. But until then, I can tell you that even an hour or so that I've spent with you, gradually, some of you, at the end of the day, your mentality concerning things Africa will begin to change. Yes, it will begin to change. The first point under here, the impact it has made is that it has provided a comprehensive understanding of Africa. Yes, provided a comprehensive understanding of Africa. Because it has brought Africa onto the limelight or the center stage. And this was made possible through what? Systematic research. Research conducted by Africans and even some of them not Africans. And their research are published so that the whole world will know issues about Africa. And that is why today some Europeans, Americans come to Africa to spend some time here and go back. And indeed, that is the impact African studies has made. And in the area of, or the field of religion, African studies has also made an impact there. Through African studies, today Ghana recognizes African traditional religion as one of its religions, and it is in the constitution. It is in our constitution. African traditional religion is recognized. And this is an impact African studies has made. And it is because, you see, we have realized that the role or the effect or the contribution that Christianity is making in the life of its adherents, the role, the contribution Islam is making in the life of its adherents, African traditional religion is also making same. Let me just drop this. Even those of us some of us who call ourselves either Muslims or Christians, when we are faced with challenges or problems, we Nicodemously consult Kweku, Brunsam and the rest for solution. We don't want to do it in the night. Then there's people who say, hey, Osafo, and Osafo Mami, where are you going? So we do it in the night. That's why I use the word Nicodemously. So in the area of the field of what? Religion. African studies have made an impact. And some of us, like some Christians, some Muslims, are having double allegiance. They are here and there. There are two stories of Christians who are looking for the fruit of the womb. Sometimes they end up in using herbs and whatsoever, and they get their children. So, based on this, we realize that African traditional religion is playing a key role in the life of most people. The adherents of the faith and even non-adherents of the faith. In the field of anthropology, how has African studies impacted on the society? Yes, the African studies has also done a lot. Yes. It has led to a positive change in people's perception about African culture and societies. We used to have negative perception. Of course, some of us need to erase those perceptions. And I believe that at the end of the semester, some of you, that negative mentality you have about Africa or things Africa will change. Yes, it will change. Yes, it will change. And indeed, African studies have deepened our understanding about things Africa, or things about African societies and our culture. We tend to use, for instance, derogatory terms to describe African societies or African cultures or things African. Let me give you an illustration from the religion. We refer to African traditional religion as fetish. Fetish, that's how sometimes some of us refer, that African traditional religion is fetish. But you see, the truth of the matter is that every religion is fetish or has an aspect of fetishism there. The word fetish is from, I think, Portuguese word fetico. F-E-T-I-C-O, fetico. F-E-T-I-C-O, fetico. What does fetico means? Fetico means man-made religious object. I repeat, fetico means man-made religious object. So every religion, that's why I say every religion can be described as fetico, because we have man-made religious objects in every religion. The crucifix, for instance, did not descend from heaven. It was man-made. If it was man-made, then it is fetico. It is fetico. In Islam, the tasbih, the tasbih that the Muslims use in prayer is fetico because it's man-made. It never descended directly from Allah. No. The Holy Rosary, the Catholic use, did not come directly from heaven. It is man-made. They are all what? Fetico. They are fetico. But because of ignorance, as scripture, the Christian scripture will say, my people perish. Ignorance on the part of Africans, we do not know. So we refer to African traditional religion as fetico. When even if you are a Christian or a Muslim, your religion, there are fetish issues there. Turn to the field of anthropology, that today some of us have realized that it is inappropriate and indeed misplaced to use the term fetico to refer to African traditional religion. African traditional religion. Yes. There are a lot of issues that we can cite example. Now through African studies, we realize that, bride price. Nobody can buy a woman. The lady you want to marry, can you buy her? No amount of money can buy her. So through African studies, we realize that bride price is not the appropriate word to use. It's like you are buying the lady. She becomes your bona fide property. No, you can't buy her. In fact, you can't buy human beings. So African studies saying that let us use bride wealth, rather than saying bride price. And all this happens to come from what? African studies. And African studies also in a way has established a linkage between Africans on the African continent here and those in the diaspora. That is why we are interested, especially in Ghana, the year of the returnees. Occasionally, the Black Americans come here and then we celebrate Pan-Africanism or Pan-Africanism. And some of them, like I indicated earlier on, have returned to Africa. They are temporarily here. Sometimes they leave back to America or Europe and you come back. Rita Mali, as I indicated earlier, she's in the Eastern region. So sometimes she's here, then again she'll move. And this is the work of African studies. The work of African studies. Let me go to the last section that has to do with the challenges, bedeviling or setbacks facing the discipline African studies. Yes, the setbacks. We have inadequate resources, lack of interest in African studies, scarcity of publishing houses, disagreement among scholars. These are the challenges. But let me say that there are certain challenges that are unique to most, if not all, African countries. or in African universities where African studies is offered. I say this because today, like I indicated earlier on, worldwide, the universities worldwide, there's no university today that is not offering African studies. Whether it's in America, the Caribbean, the Asia, Pacific, where they all offer African studies because of its importance. So some of these problems cannot be found in America. They do not exist at all. A problem like inadequate resources is not a problem or challenge in American universities because they have independent institutions that sometimes, apart from the government, that sometimes sponsor their students to come to the African continent here or Africa here to conduct research. And they go, these students will go back, write books, and come and sell it to us. So in terms of resources, they don't have any problem. And let me add that the resources can be seen in two perspectives. Infrastructure-wise and monetary-wise. The inadequate resources can be seen in two perspectives. Infrastructure-wise and monetary dimension-wise. But in all dimensions, developed nations do not have problems. It is only in Africa, or most African countries, that we have that problem of inadequate resources. I remember when African studies started in, what's the name? The University of Cape Coast. Some years back. They had one room, and in the room, it was partitioned. They used plywood to divide it into three. So one section, the receptionist is there, or the general office is there, then the workers occupy one, and then the director also occupy one. In Ghana, apart from Legon, that have a well-structured building built by Kwame Nkrumah, most universities in Ghana here that offer African studies do not have a full complemented department of their own. They are struggling. Not to talk about the money. The money is not coming. Because government does not have the interest to sponsor things about Africa. Yes. Let me link that one to the lack of interest in African studies. That's the second one. The lack of interest in African studies. The lack of interest also we can see from two ways. On the part of parents, no, let's take it three ways. One, on the part of parents. Two, students. Three, government. I repeat, the lack of interest can be seen in three ways. One, parents. Two, students. Three, government. I believe some of you, if this course was not made compulsory, like I wonder how many of you would have registered the course. So you see, when the students themselves do not have the interest to study things about themselves, they think that they know, but it is not all that. Maybe what you know, it is not all. So the student does not have the interest to offer African studies in the university. But interestingly, Americans, Europeans, people from Asia, they rather come here to study things about Africa. They come to offer African studies. Then they will go and write books and come and sell it to us. This is the problem we have. Parents also do not have the interest to allow their wards or their children to offer African studies in the universities. Why? Just imagine you applied to Legon, and then Legon decides to give you dondology. Or you applied to UCC, and then UCC decides to give you Twi, Akan, and that's come and study Akan. Most people say, now Fantini and now Twini. You are not coming to learn tree in the university. Let's look for another university. They want their children to do business courses, thinking that business courses will fetch them. So most parents don't have interest when their children are given African studies courses or programs in the university. They don't like it. They don't like it. But the problem is not from that point. The problem is that the problem centers on the issue of the humanities, because African studies is part of the humanities. This is where the problem is. This is the problem. Because the government itself, our African government, do not recognize the role and the contributions of the humanities in general. Yes. Hence, the third issue, governments in Africa, so most governments in Africa do not have interest in African studies. So they will not even devote money to sponsor people who want to conduct researches concerning African studies. Let me tell you the gospel truth. If I write a proposal and then take it to the Ghana Scholarship Scheme of Office, that I want to go to Napanduri or want to go to Tamale to study the culture of the Dagon people, and then another person writes a proposal and wants to study the Anopheles mosquito or whatsoever, I bet you the scholarship secretariat will give that student, the science student, the scholarship. You sponsor that person. For me, my proposal says, you are going to study about the Dagon people. What for? How will this impact or improve the Ghanaian economy? But I ask you, after 60 years of independence, Ghana, have we been able to manufacture, to produce manchis? We import manchis from Indonesia and the rest. Yet, when you come to the universities, chunk of government subvention money goes to sponsor the sciences, because they see science as a panacea to our development. The African studies or humanities in general, we have been relegated. They don't care about that. They don't sponsor us and whatsoever. But let me tell you the secret. Europe is Europe today because they once and today still they are giving greater priority or attention to the humanities, because they know the importance of the humanities. So they don't play with the humanities. But in our case here, we spend a lot of money in science and whatsoever. Look at the STEM quiz they are doing all the time. The money they pump into it. Sometimes I ask myself, we are producing academicians who are knowledgeable only in theory, but in practicals, they don't know anything. Yet we keep spending on them. The physics lecturer is able to teach a lot of things about physics and whatsoever. But when his radio spoils, he takes it to the wayside radio repairer who has even, sometimes some of them who have not even been to SS, he will repair it. I heard of a story of a professor in one of the sciences. I don't want to mention the area. The professor is a guru. He can calculate issues when it comes to his area of studies. And his area of studies is connected to the car engine, mechanical. He can quote and give you figures and work everything. And you know, interesting what happened? One day his car got spoiled. the car developed a problem. He was going somewhere and the car developed a problem, so he left the car there. And he called somebody from Sidu, the fitting workshop in Cape Coast. And the master sent one of his small boys to come and attend to the professor. When the gentleman came, the gentleman has not even, I'm sure he didn't complete SS square. When the gentleman came, the professor has left the car behind. So he said, oh, he looked at it, it was a problem with the terminal. Just the terminal had just moved, shifted. But the professor, who can talk about everything about the engine, it never occurred to him that the problem is with the terminal, book knowledge. And the young man waited when the professor left, and then he just opened the bonnet and then pressed the terminal small and sparked, and then the car responded. When the professor came, so your cost is 50 cedis. By then, this is more than 10 years ago. 50 cedis was a huge money. And the professor gave him the 50 cedis and he went. And when he went, he said, oh, Master, and then it is a terminal one fancy in the 2 year. And now he said, oh, Master, tell where they are or professor. We did 50 cedis. That's what happened. Book knowledge. So we are producing people who are knowledgeable in theory, but in practicals, zero. How can we develop when we have this mindset? It is about time government gets interest in the humanities and specifically sponsor issues about African cities. That together, the humanities will play their role, the sciences will play their role, and Ghana will be lifted high. But if we always focus on one thing, and we are not getting the needed results, and we are still pouring money there, sometimes some of us, we don't know. When we hear this, it is worries us. But that's the fact of the matter, that's the truth. Students do not have interest. Parents do not have interest. Government does not also have interest to sponsor things about the humanities and specifically the African cities, because they think it will not help us. Because they think that science is the panacea to our development, and that is wrong. That mentality is wrong. The humanities must also come on board. Right, let's go to the scarcity of publishing houses. That is also another challenge. Yes, that's also another challenge. Why is it a challenge? Imagine I've gone to Dagon. I have financed myself. I've gone for a loan from the bank and I've been able to conduct my research. I've come back, I've done my analysis and everything. Now the challenge I have is, where will I publish my book? We have few publishing houses in Ghana here. Most of them are not publishing houses, they are printing presses or printing houses. Most of them are printing houses. Printing out, but they are not publishing houses. So the few that are there, the cost of printing is expensive. It's very, very expensive. And before I'll go there, they will tell you, they are there to serve the interests of the owners. So if you don't have the money, if you have to publish something, you have to pay. Quite recently, a friend published a small book or so. I think at the cost of this, he mentioned a cost more than, I think it's more than 10,000. Yes, more than 10,000 cedis. Very expensive. And that's why today people like Asamoah and the rest prefer to go outside, send their manuscript outside online, and then the publishing houses will edit and do everything and print it and forward it back to them. It's there, the cost is less. But in our case, it's expensive. And sometimes they are selective as to what they should produce and they should publish. They always want to publish stories that are very catchy. Like I talked about, like as earlier on said about the Dagon. If I go to Dagon and do, after coming out of my research, I put that one down. Then I go into politics. Then in the politics, I conducted a research on what killed Professor Evans Atta Mills, and I published it in a book. I bet you any publishing house in the country, Ghana here, I take that work to, the manuscript will be ready to publish it for me. After selling it, they will take their money. They will even want to do it. Oh look, let's do it for you. When you sell the thing, your work will finish, come and pay. Because it will be a hot cake. Ghanaians would like to know what kills Atta Mills. Ghanaians would like to know things about his death and whatsoever. But go and let me forward the culture of the Dagon people. Oh, culture of the Dagon people. I know the idea there. I know Obianto and Mehaye Yenya. These are the things. These are the challenges we have. Let me quickly also move the last one. Disagreement among scholars. Yes. Disagreement among scholars. You see, when you are in a place where you have too many professors, where you have too many technocrats, there's always a disagreement. There's always disagreement. I bet you can. There's always disagreement. Yes. So it is when it comes to one of the challenges African studies is facing. Yes. And the disagreement one has to do with the membership of the African Studies Association. Yes. America. History tells us that some of the members were Europeans, others were Americans. And of course we had blacks too that came together to form it. But you see, African studies has to do with things African. So why should a white American be interested in joining African Studies Association? Why should a white British be interested in being part of an African Studies Association? So in fact, the first one that was formed in America, the African Studies Association in America in the 1960s, included some white Americans. So the blacks among them say, we don't understand why this is about African studies. This is about the African origin. Why should you, European or white American, be part of or wanting to be part of the association? So what happened is that some of the black conservatives disassociated themselves from that association and formed a different association. That's I think the Black Heritage Association also. Yes. That's disagreement. Then another issue that has to do with the disagreement is which direction should African studies take? Which direction? Should it take south? The direction should be south, or the direction should be to the north, or to the east, or to the west. Disagreement among scholars. This one thinks that, oh, the direction should be south. This one says no, it should be north. This one says no, it should be east. That has to do with the perspective of African studies. Oh, let it be Eurocentric. No, let it be Afrocentric. And then later on, no, let's add the diaspora, the African diaspora. Now they say, no, let us not add them. So which is which? So even, you see, within the scope, the nature and scope, the scholars always disagree. Then the third issue within the disagreement has to do with the methodological premises of some of the scholars is suspect in quote. We have problem there. Since African studies is made up of different subjects that have been brought together, what should be the methodological premises? What methodology should be used? So somebody is using methodology A, another person is using methodology Q, and whatsoever. Disagreement among scholars. Uncertain and divided concerning which methodology to use. That of the Western scholars differ from the African scholars. So we have challenge here. What should be done? This is the issue. And this has contributed, this is a challenge that is facing African cities. And like I said, when you look at the challenges, some of them are peculiar to African states or African universities on the African continent. African continent. Others, it is general. The issue of disagreement is not only in Africa or third world. It is found even in the Western world, developed world. But the issue of scarcity of publishing houses in America is not a problem. In Europe, most European countries also, it is not a problem. But in Africa, it is a problem. So some of the problems are unique to African universities, universities in Africa, and some are not a problem or challenge in the Western world. In the Western world. But when it comes to disagreement, it is a challenge either in Africa or in the Western world. It is a challenge. The last issue has to do with the section known as, at section 6. This has to do with the state of the discipline. The state of the discipline. What is the state of the discipline? You know, when African studies was introduced, it started small, in a small environment. And our first president, the then first president, Kwame Nkrumah, established the Institute of African Studies, that's in Lagos. And indeed, at that time, he advocated for something. He established that for exchange of ideas between Africans here and Africans in the diaspora, so that Africa will be able to advance forward. And it was established to lead a crusade. And the crusade is to what? Conduct researches into all aspects of the life of the African. The challenges facing the African and how we can get, as Africans, get solutions, our own solutions, not looking for the solutions from the European or American lenses, but with an African lens or lenses. That is what Nkrumah did. And after the establishment of the institution, it attracted scholars and researchers, both within and outside Africa, to come and conduct research. And through that, as it started with somewhere 23 fellowship, research fellows, but today the institute, I can tell you, boasts of more than 23 research fellows. That's the Institute of African Studies, boasts of more than 23 research fellows. It has grown, and it is continuing to expand. I indicated in one of my submissions earlier that when UCC started African Studies, they had only one room, which it was partitioned and divided with plywood into three. And of course, the number of students also wasn't great. But today, the African Studies have its own department with offices. That is the state today. The number of students have increased. Today, they offer doctorate. But when they started, it wasn't like that. From the beginning, humble beginning, and even had lecturers coming from Lagos to teach in UCC here. But today, they have produced their own to the PhD level. And that is the state of African cities in UCC and in Legon, which I would say it's a plus and very, very important. And it continues to continue to grow. And a lot of publications about African cities, articles written about Africa, our culture, our societies, and whatsoever have been published in different journals. And this is helping the state of African cities, and it's a plus. And in UCC, for instance, we have quite a number of disciplines or courses that are offered by the Department of African Studies. One, we have a course like Religion in Africa, a course like The Influence of Christianity, the Ghanaian Experience, Language and Ethnicity, Africa in the Unipolar World, Africa in Dispensation, and the African Family. These are just few of them. And usually, these are universal courses where every fresher or first year who is mandated to study. Mandated to study. And it is a plus. So gradually, African studies is making a headway. And so I believe that at the end of the day, you also be impacted with what is known as African studies. The African studies has made a lot of impact. And through African studies, for instance, students acquire knowledge, and they are required to undertake community-based projects during the course of their studies. And indeed today we have a resurgence of democracy in Africa, in which we'll talk about it in later units. And of course, globalization will also be treated. But this is just to give you the gist that yes, African studies has come to stay. It started humbly, and it is making an impact. And the impact, like I said, so far no study has been conducted to quantify the impact African studies has made in percentage terms. But that doesn't mean that it has not, or it is not making impact. It is making an impact. And I believe it is still making that at the end of the semester, most of you, it will make an impact in your life. And your mentality, your perception about things of Africa will change. For African studies have come to stay. I believe I'll come to you another time with a different unit. That will be the unit 2. I really enjoy having a discussion with you. So, bye-bye.